Hi, my name is Mike, and I'm here to read a comic. And today's comic is What If Spider Man's Clone Lived? Dated December 1981. Although the book was probably, the comic, I should say, was probably on the newsstand a few months earlier. We see the cover here, pretty good cover here. Not really representative of who Peter Parker is, but nevertheless pretty dramatic. We see two Spider-Mans. One Spider-Man is trapped in what seems to be a kind of a chamber, and the other Spider-Man is sort of like twirling his evil mustache, going, ha ha ha, you'll never escape, and no one will never know. It didn't play out this way in the comic, thankfully. This is one of my favorite what ifs. And the reason is that this basically, I would be fine if they had incorporated this storyline into the regular Spider-Man universe or the regular title at the time. There needed to be some changes. The resolution is definitely wrong. But nevertheless, I really kind of enjoyed the younger Peter Parker and the older Peter Parker interacting with each other. The second story in this comic involves the Inhumans. I'm not going to look at that one. I never really liked the Inhumans. Black Bolt always seemed like a terrible leader. Their society is horribly dysfunctional. So it was hard for me to sort of get into the Inhumans overall. So I'm just going to focus on the Spider-Man story. And this is a what if the Spider-Man clone lived. This clone saga from the 70s was very well remembered. The reason they had the clone saga actually went back a couple years earlier when they made the decision to kill off Gwen Stacy. So as everyone knows in Spider-Man history, Spider-Man's first real serious girlfriend, Gwen Stacy, she was murdered by the Green Goblin, I should say. Gwen Stacy, the only interesting thing that character did was getting murdered, or getting killed, I should say. Anyway, a lot of the fans were absolutely livid at not only them killing off this character, but also sort of the way they did it, where there was no goodbye. Like Peter didn't get a chance to sort of bare his soul and sort of have a proper goodbye, so to speak, if you're going to kill off Gwen Stacy. The way they did in the comic, there was no coming back from that. Honestly, I thought it was a good decision because I thought Mary Jane was a much better character for being Peter's girlfriend. So anyway, that's sort of the origin of the original clone saga. There was a second clone saga in the 90s. I wasn't reading comic books at the time. I heard it was awful, that it was something that just got out of control editorially. It was supposed to be only a few issues, and it ended up running 2 years because the creative teams at the time were just mangling the project. I think it was the Ben Reilly clone saga. I'm not sure. I know very little of comic books from the 90s. So anyway, story opens up with the conclusion of the first clone saga. We see Gwen Stacy, the clone of Gwen Stacy. We also see Professor Warren, who is the Jackal, who was the arch enemy of Spider-Man at the time. And we see Spider-Man battling another Spider-Man. And we're told here that one of those Spider-Mans is a clone. Because apparently Professor Warren had gained blood samples from both Gwen Stacy and Peter Parker. It makes sense. He was their professor, and he was their biology professor, so it made sense they would volunteer for something like that. It turns out that the motive behind the Jackal was that Professor Warren was kind of a dirty old man, and he fell in love with Gwen Stacy, inappropriate as it was. But nevertheless, and it turned out that during that time, Professor Warren found out that Spider-Man is Peter Parker, basically. And because of this knowledge, this caused Warren to snap, both that Spider-Man killed Gwen Stacy and that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. So he became an arch criminal. The conclusion of the saga is that he's fighting this clone. The clone Gwen is sickened by Professor Warren's behavior. And Professor Warren is taking this to heart because he knows that's how the real Gwen would act. Because he thought what he was doing is basically setting up this fight where his clone would kill Spider-Man, would somehow be seen as romantic by Gwen. Except for the Manson girls, women usually don't consider murder romantic. So Gwen Stacy, she's very angry about this. Professor Warren has a moment of redemption, and he saves Ned Leeds, who's a reporter at the Bugle, who's a friend of Peter Parker, which is why Professor Warren, the Jackal, kidnapped him. He saves his life because they're fighting it out at Chase Stadium with their big billboard. The dynamite that was slated to kill Ned ends up killing the Jackal. And in the proper Spider-Man title, the clone is also killed in this explosion. And what Peter Parker did was fucking jack. It was horrible. I remember reading this as a kid thinking that Peter Parker was terrible. He took the corpse of the Spider-Man clone and threw him into a factory chimney to be incinerated, and then I guess presumably thrown out with the oil soot. And I can understand his thinking is that, hey, this is a clone, it's not really human, and he's already dead, blah blah blah. I thought that was a fucked up move by Spider-Man. But nevertheless, in this what if, the Spider-Man clone isn't killed. So Professor Warren is killed, but the Spider-Man clone isn't killed. And it turns out that Gwen does have a good... and it turns out that Spider-Man not only saves Ned Leeds, he also is the Spider-Man that's knocked out. Sorry, the gummies are really getting to me. The Spider-Man that's knocked out stays knocked out, but he's not killed. Okay, so the clone Spider-Man lives, and Ned Leeds is still saved, but the Jackal's dead. If that made any sense. And we see Gwen. She's asking Spider-Man, "Hey, are you the clone? Are you sure you're not the clone?" However, Spider-Man clone, he's not. He's kind of like not hearing that. He's like, I got an unconscious person here. I can't hear you. Can't hear you. So Gwen's question about whether he knows he's the real or the clone goes unanswered. Spider-Man remembers the Jackal had a secret hideout. He remembers this sort of suspended animation chamber. Both the clones emerge from this chamber. And this Spider-Man puts the unconscious Spider-Man in there until he can figure out what to do with him. It's kind of fucked up because the clone is still a human being, and particularly since he's doing this to himself, a version of himself, it's kind of jacked, but nevertheless, this Spider-Man does this, and he goes off to kind of figure out what's going on with his life, because he does seem to have some questions. And one of the questions, he heads home, or what was his, or what was traditionally the Parker's home, and he finds that it's been abandoned, and it looks like it hasn't been lived in for a while. And he's noticing that the clothing that was left, that is his, is a little bigger. He doesn't really recognize most of it. So it seems like Peter's kind of a little bit of a fog here. from his experience with the Jackal. However, it turns out that he says that he's going to visit the next door neighbor as sort of a rouge to sort of fill in what's going on, because he does feel a little bit out of place. He doesn't know where Aunt May was. He doesn't know why all the furniture was kind of put away into storage and such. So it turns out that Aunt May's bringing up a lot of stuff that Peter's not familiar with. So Peter sort of writes this off as a case of amnesia. Now, the reader obviously should figure out what's going on here, that this is the clone. But nevertheless, they're sort of doing a good job of hiding that. And we can see the clone. So it's sort of like a Columbo episode where we kind of know what's going on, but we have to wait and see on when and how Columbo figures out what's going on. So we see Spider-Man. He's still kind of in the fog. He's still blaming it all on amnesia. He decides that maybe he just needs to see more familiar settings, so he heads to the Bugle. And he does encounter people he knows. So these people were like, he's not like, huh, who, what? But he could see that his relationship with them has changed. For example, his relationship with Robbie has changed. When Peter probably went into the Bugle offices, he probably noticed Robbie, but maybe Robbie didn't have the job as, assistant publisher or second in command, which is what Robbie was in Spider-Man. He might have been still a ground reporter when Peter first started selling photographs to the Bugle. So he's kind of a little off on why Robbie is much more familiar with Peter. He probably just had a high and by relationship before. He sees Betty. He gets excited when he sees Betty. Betty was Peter Parker's first crush, first girlfriend, first girl he dated and he was serious about. So their breakup had not occurred yet, because I think they had dated for about a year, and I guess the writing team figured out that it just wasn't working. Or they wanted to make it realistic, like young people, they find someone and then, they fall out of love and they find someone else. And kind of keep the dating aspect of Peter Parker's persona going. So anyway, Peter's kind of confused here. They're having very confused. Because again, he's encountering things that had not happened to him yet. He's finding out that Betty, I believe, is already married at this point. So this Peter Parker still has a romantic crush on her, but she's already moved on. And Peter Parker actually does not know where he lives at this point, because this Peter Parker kind of moved into Chelsea when Chelsea wasn't such a great neighborhood. And he's kind of like, he's also kind of pumping these people for information passively. So as Peter was sort of lost in thought about what had happened with Betty, he didn't realize he was actually in front of his apartment building. Now, before I go back to the story, I'm going to take a look at this one page. It's NBC's upcoming Saturday morning lineup. Saturday morning was absolutely huge for kids from the 60s to I say about the early 2000s. So for like 3 plus decades, the Saturday morning lineup was huge in terms of cartoons, because you'd see this is the only place you'd see these cartoons, and these were considered much higher value cartoons than say the ones you saw on regular local TV. We see the Flintstones. They still had a little juice in them. I don't think any of them reached the success of the original series. They had a number of series. See the Smurfs. The Smurfs were definitely the breakout. They were the breakout cartoon of the 80s. And then, except for maybe He-Man. But no, I think Smurfs were bigger than that. See, Shazam was still on. I don't know if this is the live action or the cartoon. I don't remember the cartoon. I remember the live action one. I love that. It kind of looks like a cartoon. Never heard of that. Never seen it. Another one was called Space Stars. I was sort of tuning out of cartoons at this point. Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. That I watched. I did watch the superhero cartoons. And then this kind of Daffy Duck. Yeah, I kind of aged out of cartoons. I think I was watching the Smurfs because it was sort of like something reminded me of HR Puffin stuff, and I was watching Spider-Man. I don't think I was watching the rest at this time. So we see Peter Parker. He's kind of just malingering, kind of hanging out in the neighborhood, kind of hoping someone will say something to him and kind of indirectly point him in the right direction. That person does come by. Gloria Grant kind of sees him sleeping on the stoop, and she sort of kind of nudges him in the right direction. Then Peter Parker changes to Spider-Man, and he snoops into all the windows, and then he sees a window with items that are familiar to him, his telescope and his web shooters. So then Peter Parker enters the apartment. He says, "Oh, yeah, this kind of furnished my style, but this clothing is still a little big. What's going on here?" And so he's going through some stuff. At this point, the clone should have figured this stuff out. This is the only thing I dislike about this story, and it couldn't be helped. The clone should have figured this out. So anyway, he's reading some letters and correspondence from Gwen. He sees the how emotional the correspondence between them. There are pictures. There's the news article on her death, and he doesn't remember any of this, and he just breaks down in tears because he sees the evidence of this great emotional bond he had with this woman, but at the same time he has no memories of it. So he knows something's wrong. I mean, come on. At this point, he should have figured it out. But nevertheless, he continues on, and he searches. I believe he's looking through Professor Warren's home. He comes across a secret laboratory. He sees Warren's scientific notes. Warren was an expert at cloning. Cloning was the big thing in the 70s in terms of, like, I guess an emerging technology, because usually when they talk about emerging technologies, it's talking about computers, but this was a biological one where they were going to clone. But a lot of people were fearful of this, this dreaded, brainwashed army of humans. But people forgot that, a clone, outside of the way it was conceived, is just another human being. And that's why the cloning craze of the 70s kind of died down. People kind of realized that, we're worried about nothing. So he's going through the notes, Spider-Man's going through the notes. Then he finally figures out that he is the clone of Peter Parker. We knew this all along. And it took maybe a little too long for him to figure this out. So this guy's going through, so the clone is going through a personal angst here. Because he is a clone, but at the same time, he's also a human being. And he views himself as a human being. And he feels that he has every bit of right to the Peter Parker identity as the, quote, real Peter Parker. So that's the conflict there. Because he does not consider himself a freak or any type of anomaly or some horrible biological mistake. He sees himself as Peter Parker. So anyway, we see a homage to some of the original Spider-Man artwork from Amazing Adventure 15. I should mention the art. The art's pretty good. I like the layouts, and I think maybe when they did the finishing artwork, they kind of rushed it a little. So I think they have a lot of good layouts. I think the artwork's kind of mediocre, but I still like it. Nevertheless, we see Spider-Man encountering a couple of watchmen. They're both armed, and they're treating him like a criminal. I think at the time of the clones, when the clone blood was taken, I think Peter Parker's reputation with the police was a little better at this time. So, and he also the police regard him as a murder suspect in the death of Gwen Stacy. He doesn't know that, so he's surprised how vigorous law enforcement. I call these guys watchmen. They're probably police officers. So anyway, Spider-Man gets away from those cops. He leaves the place. He encounters more cops, and then he kind of has to dodge their gunplay. More police officers are shooting at him. Spider-Man, he has the scientific notes. That's what he wants, and he does escape the police officers. So anyway, this Spider-Man, he's doing some contemplating because he has a kind of a deep, obviously, moral dilemma, because he is Peter Parker, but he knows there's another Peter Parker that was there before him who has a true claim to being the real Peter Parker. He has to decide what to do with his life, because he wants. Oh, he's not terminating his life just because the other guy doesn't like a duplicate of him. So he has to figure out what's going on. However, as this is happening, a flying robot attacks Spider-Man as he's thinking, and he hears a voice. It's a voice that should be familiar to Spider-Man, but not this Spider-Man. And it's the Kingpin. Kingpin would have come in after the blood sample, because he was already because Peter Parker was already in college when the Kingpin made his first appearance. And we could see the robot is still, or the drone, I should say, they weren't called drones back then, still pestering Spider-Man. Spider-Man takes care of the wings, kind of doesn't have much regard for it. Then he kind of like creates a spider web to sort of kind of like, swing it around him and just get it out of the way. However, it explodes before he can release it. So this Spider-Man is realizing that guy I fought was kind of dangerous. So he contemplates what happened there. He also goes back to school to take some of his classes. He runs into Flash Thompson. Now, him and Flash were at the outs of the time that the clone was conceived. So he's thinking that Flash Thompson is going to just be a jerk to him. And it turns out Flash is really nice to him. And this, I love this. This Peter Parker is 1,000% confused. He's totally confused. He's like Ronan confused at the end of the first Guardians movie.
What are you doing?
Dance off, bro. Me and you.
So anyway, it seems like he's kind of impressed with the way older Peter took their social life. So he's kind of thinking approvingly of Peter Parker being friends with old enemies. So anyway, Peter Parker, he takes the college courses that this Peter Parker is taking. He realizes that they're far too advanced for him, and that he's going to have to call off this semester. Then he puts on his Spider-Man outfit. He kind of goes out and patrol, does what Peter Parker was doing at the time. Same way, he encounters the Kingpin in time, and this time in person. And let me see what's next. I have to actually turn the page here. Sorry. Okay, before I go to what's next, so we see Spider-Man and the Kingpin, they're ready to face off for the second time. This time the Kingpin is there in person. We look at CBS's Saturday morning lineup, their upcoming lineup. I remember a few of these shows. I think I was still watching Bugs Bunny at the time. I think I probably was watching a little bit of Popeye. I did not watch Black Star, but I did watch the Tarzan Lone Ranger hour. I did not watch Zorro. I did watch Fat Albert, and I wasn't watching Tom and Jerry at the time. Okay, so yeah, it's kind of a solid lineup, not a great lineup though. And then, okay, I have to figure out how to turn the page. Oh, okay. Okay, so okay, finish with it. In terms of the Saturday morning lineup, I mean it's a solid lineup, nothing spectacular. Same way we go back to the action with Spider-Man and Kingpin. This is a great panel, I should say. Spider-Man just gives Kingpin this vicious kick. This is concussion kick. This is a kick that would rip your head off. Spider-Man doesn't give a shit. The clone doesn't care at this point. He's just gonna take this guy's head off. But luckily for Kingpin, he can take this type of hit. And yeah, it looks like the clone is getting frustrated here. And again, this is another thing. I like that show of emotion. Then Spider-Man notices the Kingpin has some henchmen with him. He takes care of them, but the Kingpin had recovered quicker than Spider-Man anticipated. And he really felt that punch from the back of the head from the Kingpin. So we see that this version, Peter Parker, he knows he's a little overmatched, and he knows he's underprepared. Because he doesn't know anything about this guy. He's learning about him on the fly. And it's kind of throwing Spider-Man off. He flails. He's not backing down. He flails at the Kingpin. The Kingpin moves faster than he expected. And so Spider-Man just takes off top of a chimney, but not much else. Meanwhile, the Kingpin is getting some really close calls with Spider-Man here. So... And Spider-Man also remembers, or his spider sense tells him that there's also the gunmen. And those guys, they're not afraid to shoot. They might aim badly, but they're not afraid to shoot. Peter Parker realizes at this point he's in over his head. He's like treading water because he's still in there with them and he's still surviving. But he knows it's just a numbers game at this point, so he runs off. This is atypical behavior from Spider-Man. So Kingpin is just like, oh boy, he is thrilled at this. He calls him a coward. And he says, "You want to fight me again? I'm going to be in Coney Island." And yeah, I love that. I love that show of emotion. So anyway, this Peter Parker, he realizes that the world has gone on without him, and he's suddenly had to continue at this point. He also realizes that he does have to make a decision about the quote real Peter Parker. Again, a homage to some classic Spider-Man imagery. We see Peter Parker weighing in. He's considering it, maybe just letting this person die, so the universe can feel right with just one Peter Parker. He says he can do it, get away with it. Nobody would know, not even Peter Parker, because he was unconscious the entire time. But he says, you know what? That was an interesting theory, but I'm not doing that. Peter Parker, that's not the person who's going to do something like that. Peter Parker is going to let a life live, particularly one that he likes, and they're going to work it out afterwards. So then Spider-Man frees the regular Spider-Man from his chamber. So the two Spider-Mans are meeting here. And I love the interaction. I love the clone. He's just taking it calm, like, hey, how you doing, pal? the real Spider-Man answers back the clone, and the clone says, hey, we clones are very sensitive. So that sort of quick-witted banter is immediate with these two. So these two, they're bonding. They're bonding. They're talking like they're the best of bros. Now, regular Peter Parker, he's the one who needs to be updated on some of the going-ons. So the clone is kind of filling in, letting him know that Professor Warren is gone. He's dead. Gwen is kind of moved on from New York, and she's going to live her life, the best she can. So, anyway, the clone also lets regular Peter Parker know that the Kingpin is on the rampage. He's looking out for Spider-Man. So this is an issue we have to confront. So it looks like they're both about to go out and web swing to Coney Island. However, one of the Spider-Mans reminds the other Spider-Man, there can only be one of us as far as the public is concerned. So they decided they were going to flip a coin to see who goes as Spider-Man, who goes as Peter Parker. Kind of disagree with that. I mean, you let the senior Peter Parker go, or the senior or real Spider-Man, because he knows the Kingpin. And inexperienced, Peter Parker can just simply watch as Peter Parker. So again, I love the bonding with these two. You see Spider-Man carrying Peter Parker across town. They're debriefing. So they're in action, but they're also debriefing each other. He says, listen, tell me about this Kingpin guy. He says, listen, this guy's as dangerous as anyone I've ever fought. But you just be careful and get some good pictures. And they're calling each other bro now. Oh man, I love this. These guys have bonded. And then the clone Peter Parker is wishing the real Peter Parker luck. There's a view screen of this. So at the very least, the Kingpin and some of his henchmen are witnesses that Peter Parker and Spider-Man have been seen together in one place. However, that's not the Kingpin isn't thinking about that. He's just seeing Peter Parker, and he realizes that, hey, this is an interloper, and he might have a financial arrangement with Spider-Man, but we don't care. Kidnap this guy. So his gunmen, they go and they capture Peter Parker. Peter Parker just lets them do it. He could have stopped them easily, but nevertheless, he's taken into the clone Peter Parker is taken into the Kingpin's citadel. And the real Spider-Man, he's off to battle the Kingpin. We see they're fighting in Coney Island. They're at the obviously the amusement park. We see Kingpin. Somehow he had gained some ownership of the Wonder Wheel. He's on the Ferris wheel right now. Kingpin has this shocker cane. I guess it's a device one of his scientists had developed. This is something that's not really true to the character. Kingpin is seen with these kind of elaborate scientific tools. And while the comic world does establish that, the Marvel world does establish that Kingpin has access to stuff like this, he really doesn't use it too much. Nevertheless, the real Spider-Man's kind of taken for a slip here. He notices that's something, he's seeing new stuff from the Kingpin. Like the Kingpin actually sort of has this one of the Ferris wheel cars actually it can levitate, sort of like the Fantastic Four's Fantastic Mobile. I don't know I forgot what they called that. So anyway, Kingpin, he's showing new stuff. So the real Spider-Man is kind of happy he's the guy who went up against Kingpin. So, because he's like, hold it, this is new stuff I haven't seen before. So the other guy, oh boy, that would not have gone well. However, this Spider-Man, he's a bit more experienced. He knows other things, and he attacks the Kingpin from behind. He's able to dislodge him from the floating vehicle. The Kingpin, is basically helpless at this point, and Spider-Man's just totally fucking around with him. He's like making jokes that maybe Spider-Man can just drop to the ground and land on the Kingpin. So they're both in. So Spider-Man is swinging with the Kingpin. The Kingpin is kind of putting up a fight. The Kingpin is webbed down, so he's a captive of Spider-Man. However, Kingpin's gunmen, they have Peter Parker as hostage. However, Peter Parker is not too worried about that. From what we see, the Kingpin is threatening Spider-Man, saying, "Unless you do this, we'll kill the kid." And then Peter Parker said, "Let me get into the action here." He does a flying kick where he kicks both of the Kingpin's gunmen at the same time. He also snaps out of the bonds that were holding him. No surprise, given that he has spider strength. He's just sort of playing it off like, oh, well, they weren't tied too tight. So they're having a little bit of fun here, too. We see Kingpin is being chased down. He kind of runs. I never knew the Kingpin to sort of run in fear, but this one does. And Spider-Man takes kind of easy care of Kingpin, just kind of gives him a kick in the head. Kingpin looks really grotesque in that drawing, though. I like the layouts of this particular issue, but some of the finished art was definitely rushed. So anyway, Peter Parker's taking some pictures of Spider-Man wrapping up, captured the Kingpin, captured the gunman, and then we have a little bit of an epilogue in Peter Parker's apartment. The two Peter Parkers are talking. Clone Peter Parker came up with the idea of basically following Gwen's lead, which is simply to leave New York and, adopt a different name and just live another life. However, real Peter Parker said, no, we might have another idea. This is what I have a point of contention with. This is a bad suggestion. What Peter Parker is suggesting is that they alternate being Peter Parker and Spider-Man on different days. So basically, one of them would be at nights 3 times a week, the other would be 2 times, and they would kind of fight it out for weekends or flip a coin, something like that. Bad idea. Terrible idea. First of all, Peter Parker is romantically involved with a woman. Is clone Peter Parker going to be able to screw Mary Jane? And what if clone Peter Parker, who still has his own independent thoughts, he doesn't like Mary Jane? And is real Peter Parker going to get jealous when clone Peter Parker's around? And can clone Peter Parker find love, knowing that he's basically committed to another man's girlfriend? So this ending is jacked up. Really, what they should have done, maybe somehow introduce clone Peter Parker as a relative, long lost relative. They just happen to look a lot alike. Clone Peter Parker can kind of dye his hair. Now, they already established they have certain differences. The real Peter Parker is a few years older and he's a few years bigger. So if people start questioning how much they look alike, they can just sell it off as, except for me being a little taller or a little bigger and him being a little younger, we kind of look alike. So I would have gone with that and just hopefully that Aunt May doesn't have that great a memory and they can kind of play off a long lost relative. If they had done that in the regular comic, I would have been fine with that. But that's something they would not do. They did not like to experiment too much with their top sellers. So rather than a comic changing, they sort of gave the appearance of change. I sort of became frustrated with Spider-Man as much as I loved it, simply because they weren't really going places. And this is the standard time. I sort of liked. There was a small moment where Peter Parker was romantically involved with the Black Cat, and how she had a romantic fetish for Spider-Man, but she couldn't stand Peter Parker. I remember liking that storyline, but oftentimes with Spider-Man from the 80s on, it just sort of looked like they really weren't changing too much. So anyway, that's my look back at What If number 30 from December 1981, and I hope to have more reviews up soon. Bye.